Persona 3 is one of my favorite games and just overall favorite pieces of media of all time. Not just that, but it's one of the most influential pieces of media in my life, affecting me on a level that not many other games have. So when this game was revealed to be getting a remake in Persona 3 Reload, I, as well as many other fans of this game, were excited as one of our favorite games will be getting brought back to life in a new way. And after beating this game 100% to completion over the last couple of weeks, I can confidently say that this is the prime example of how to remake a game. And not just that, this is without question the definitive way to experience Persona 3's story and everything it has to offer. This game is an absolute love letter to the fans of Persona 3 and to everything that Persona 3 represents. This video will contain pretty heavy spoilers for Persona 3 Reload, since I'll be discussing how it compares to the original in a lot of ways, and I don't think I can really discuss this game in depth without truly diving into the more plot-heavy elements of Persona 3. But with all that being said, let's get into it and talk about how ATLUS made the perfect game in Persona 3 Reload. Now, before I talk about Reload itself, we need to go back and truly understand how is it that we got to this point in the first place. Persona 3 was released on July 13th, 2006 in Japan, later being developed into Persona 3 FES or FES, which released about a year later. FES at the time was considered by many within the community to be the definitive version of Persona 3, and as a whole, Persona 3 was worshipped as a classic JRPG for the PlayStation 2, heralded for its dark and gritty story and its well-written characters, as well as being the foundation for many of the mechanics that would end up becoming a series staple down the line, such as the social element of the game, which is represented by social links. Persona 3 was a game changer, as this was the entry where Persona started to diverge itself from its big brother, Shin Megami Tensei. Persona 3 was so worshipped and so popular that ATLUS would then go on to include its characters in a number of spin-offs, such as Persona Q and Q2, Persona 4 Arena, and Ultimax, which featured aged up versions of the characters as we got to see what they were up to after the events of Persona 3. We also got a new version of Persona 3 in Persona 3 Portable for the PSP, where we got to see the game through an entirely new lens of the FemC, as she's commonly known, or by her actual name, Kotone Shiomi, as well as a rhythm game featuring the cast in Persona 3 Dancing, and we also got a tetralogy of movies as well. At this point, all that was left was to remake the original Persona 3 and provide a more modernized experience for Persona fans both new and old. But at the same time, there were many people within the community that believed Persona 3 didn't necessarily need a remake and were fine with it as it already was. After all, it's natural for people to be hesitant towards the idea of a remake, since it's just as easy to mess a remake up as it is to nail it. But any of those reservations were immediately shattered upon ATLUS dropping the very first Persona 3 Reload trailer, and it was a completely mesmeric experience. Just from the trailers alone, Reload looked absolutely gorgeous, and it felt like Persona 3's identity was going to be left intact. And after the game released, that statement holds even more so true now. From the bright lights and changing seasons found within Gekkokan High School, to the darkness and uncertainty found within the Dark Hour, and each of the 6 blocks of Tartarus being recreated in such a disturbingly faithful fashion, from Feeble all the way to Adama, simply walking through each of the areas of Tartarus is enough to paint a picture of just how aesthetically pleasing Tartarus can be and how enjoyable it is to watch the different areas change, to the desolate wasteland and washed out colors found within the month of January. You can really tell that capturing Persona 3's essence was ATLUS's first and foremost priority. And of course, you know I couldn't not talk about the menus. The menus in this game are absolutely gorgeous. It's incredible just how beautiful this game looks from an aesthetic perspective. Reload doesn't sacrifice any type of substance for style, but is instead a perfect blend of the two. One thing that I will say the original game does better are the animated cutscenes though, and this isn't necessarily Reload's fault. This is more or less just a natural occurrence. There was no real way to capture the essence and life of those mid-2000s anime cutscenes, and instead, ATLUS opted to use their in-game models for certain moments like Makoto's Persona Awakening. This is different from the original game and is honestly a very good substitute. As a whole, this game is gorgeous from a graphical perspective, and it knocks the atmosphere and aesthetic of Persona 3 out of the park 10 times out of 10. But another thing that this game knocks out the park and enhances tenfold is the main cast, the Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad, or SEES. Between the investigation team from Persona 4 and SEES from Persona 3, they're equally some of my favorite casts in gaming, and usually I have a hard time deciding on which one I like more on a given day. The reason that SEES has always been so great to me is ironically because of how they don't feel like friends at all, at least during the beginning of the game. Over the course of the game, Makoto and the rest of SEES are tasked with the elimination of 12 major shadows, and each of them represent a different arcana, spanning from the Magician to the Hanged Man, and in doing so, they believe that this will eliminate Tartarus as well as the Dark Hour completely. And throughout the story, the group learns of several revelations as to how the Dark Hour came to be, and at the end of the game, they're faced with stopping a cataclysmic event known as the Fall, which could lead to the end of all human life. At the start of the game, SEES can more so be described as a group of associates and contemporaries as opposed to being outright friends. That doesn't necessarily mean they hate each other, and while they of course do have moments where they try to bond with each other, such as the trip they all take to Yakushima, or Makoto, Junpei, and Akihiko trying to pick up girls, they never necessarily give off that vibe of being total friends, and they honestly feel kinda awkward at times. What really brings them together though is their common goal of exploring Tartarus, and each member of SEES has their own unique reasons for being there. Mitsuru due to being the heir of the Kirijo group and trying to help her father, Akihiko as a way to satisfy his need for strength due to him using it as a coping mechanism after the death of his sister, Junpei as a way to give his life meaning and purpose due to him feeling directionless in life, and Yukari as a way to figure out the truth behind her father's death, etc. The thing that made the investigation team so likable to me was the overall group dynamic, and what made SEES so great to me was that each of them had their own personal goals for doing what they're trying to do, and eventually the group takes that next step as they're forced to not only face themselves but each other and the looming threat of death that approaches them, and they genuinely become friends along the way. But what Reload does to really push SEES over the edge and really solidify them as my favorite Persona cast is the multitude of events that allow you to build your connections with each of these characters. Not just in social links, but you can study, you can cook, you can read, you can go tend to the plants on the rooftops of the dorm building, and you even have these special linked episodes with Junpei, Akihiko, Ken, as well as Koromaru and Shinji. These linked episodes really go the extra mile in building relationships that Makoto has, such as his relationship with Junpei, as well as allowing him to interact with characters that in the original game he typically never got the chance to, like Akihiko or Shinji. In Akihiko's linked episodes, him and Makoto build a genuine underclassman to upperclassman relationship, hanging out, beating up thugs, and doing things to make everybody else in the dorm happy, like having a pancake party. And by the end of it all, Akihiko swears that no matter what, he'll always be there to protect Makoto when he needs him. He'll always be there to tag in whenever Makoto can't handle something on his own, because his fists were meant to protect those that are closest to him. That's the understanding and revelation that he has come to, and no matter what, that's what he promises on his honor as his upperclassman. With Junpei's linked episodes, it's an extension of his already pre-existing relationship with Makoto, as he informs Makoto about his own inferiority complex, and he admits to Makoto that he's capable of doing things that he never will be able to. With Shinji's linked episodes, he and Makoto build a relationship that I honestly was not anticipating that they ever would, given how disconnected the two are in the original game. In Shinji's linked episodes, Makoto genuinely tries to do right by Shinji, but not just by him, but for Akihiko and Mitsuru as well, given their previous connection with him and the fact that the two still care about him and his future, even as Shinji continues to wallow in his own self-loathing. This, as well as Ken's linked episodes where he and Makoto hang out, and you genuinely see moments of Ken starting to doubt his own resolve of finding his mother's killer, really makes that moment on October 4th hit so much harder, because by the end of it all, in Shinji's final linked episode, you see that Shinji genuinely considered going back to school, and he genuinely started thinking about his own future, even if he's not the type of person to ever say it. Shinji has always been one of the most special characters in Persona 3 to me, as one of the bigger themes surrounding Persona 3 outside of its main theme in Memento Mori is the concept of responsibility, the idea that Makoto, and subsequently the player as well, needs to be careful regarding the choices they make, and this theme isn't only represented in Makoto but in Shinji as well, if you can guess. Shinji's character arc is primarily driven by and is tied in with Ken's character arc, as Shinji's self-loathing is derived from his own guilt of killing his mother. Through the weight of his guilt consuming him, Shinji left Seas and took drugs as a way to suppress his persona, as it was his persona that led to the death of Ken's mother to begin with. When Shinji joins back, it's framed in a way where he does so in order to take responsibility for his crimes, and when it does come time for Ken and Shinji to face each other, he takes responsibility by not only sacrificing himself for Ken, but imparting words to him about using the anger he feels at the world as motivation, and for him to live his life, as he'll eventually find more in life worth living for, leading to the first death not only within the game, but within the main cast as well. Now, while I love Shinji and think that he is an amazing character, my issue with the original game was the fact that I didn't really like Ken or his character arc, and I felt that his character arc fell flat as a result of a lack of interactions with him throughout the early game. However, Reload amends this through his linked episodes. Through Ken's linked episodes, as well as the many other different types of events in the game, like cooking and what have you, you get the chance to interact with him and come to understand him a little bit before this moment takes place, which inevitably makes Ken's character arc feel a lot more fleshed out, at least a little bit. Ken in this game is a hell of a lot more likable than he was in the original game, at least in my opinion, even if he still might be my least favorite character in Persona 3 anyway. This game does a lot of legwork to really make certain characters feel a lot more inclusive to the overall group, not just Ken, but Fuka as well. While I love Fuka and I think she's incredibly sweet, I've always felt that her character arc felt a little bit disconnected from the rest of the group, and while I still do feel that way given that she's a bullying victim while everybody else deals with dead parents, for lack of a better term, she still feels a lot more inclusive with the different events that you can partake in. This might sound a little bit like a nitpick, but I would have liked it if there were moments in Reload where you could have spoken with Fuka in the overworld, or get at least a glimpse of her relationship with her friend before her inevitable addition into the group, as I feel like this would have made her character arc hit a lot harder, but as it stands, Fuka is still great to me, as is the rest of Season. Something that I really love that highlights all of the characters' personalities is their special outfits that they use to explore Tartarus. This is without question one of my favorite additions in Reload, as each of the group's special outfits really highlights their own specific personalities. The main cast and Seas aren't the only characters to get some really nice additions, but the main antagonist group in Strega as well. Strega has always been sort of a mixed bag to me. While I really do love Chidori and I think she is easily the best character of Strega even now, as her character arc and relationship with Junpei really highlights the true overarching theme of Persona 3, which is the beauty of life as well as its grandeur. But the other two, Takaya and Jin, weren't anywhere near as interesting as her, at least Jin wasn't, and while that's still true even now, Jin is honestly just a guy. The included scenes of Takaya interacting with Makoto during the game, which really brings a new layer to their relationship, was honestly kind of surprising, but at the same time, very much invited. It's almost uncanny seeing Takaya and Makoto work together at one point to take down a rogue shadow, and even more than that, seeing Takaya grow his own sense of attachment towards Makoto as he tries his hardest to convince him to join his side and conform to his ideal set. And it makes the moment where the two realize that they can never come to terms with one another honestly hit a lot harder than you'd think it would. This was genuinely a breath of fresh air, and as a whole, ATLUS did a great job with enhancing the dynamics found within Persona 3's main cast. Speaking of the cast of Persona 3, to diverge a little bit from Seas, the overall social links in this game hit so much harder now that each of them are all voiced, especially Akinari's, whose social link really does embody the theme of embracing life and its grandeur, like I mentioned earlier. Honestly speaking, as time goes on, and with me playing Reload, I feel like you really do start to appreciate a lot more of Persona 3's social links, not just the great ones like Akinari, but even some of the smaller scale ones, as in general, a lot of the characters in Persona 3 are really just trying to find their way through life, and I feel like a lot of people can identify with them, especially Akinari, that idea of your body giving up on you and you not being able to control your own fate as you feel that God or whoever you believe in has given up on you for no real reason at all. But even more than that, helping these characters to find their path and find their purpose in life through them questioning it to begin with is one of the best parts of Persona 3 and its social links, especially Akinari's, where he realizes that the meaning in life is something that can be determined by the people he impacts, which is a wonderful message and one that a lot of people can once again identify with. And of course, I would be remiss not to mention Aigis' social link, which is in my opinion still the best social link that can be found within Persona 3, and hearing it voiced has left a new impact on it, and it constantly adds to my ever-growing appreciation for Aigis. Just seeing her stumble through life trying to find her purpose, and ultimately her finding that purpose in you, is something that will stick with me throughout time itself. And just like how Shinji best represented the concept of responsibility in Persona 3, Aigis best represents the idea of finding the meaning of life and truly learning to celebrate what life has to offer in all of its flaws and in all of its facets. Aigis is a character that deserves an entire video and is honestly something I really want to do later on, depending on how this video goes, I don't really know. But just in general, I love her so much, and it doesn't matter how many times I play Persona 3, Aigis will always be special in my heart. Moving away from Aigis, I really want to take the time to delve into how Atlus improved on the character of Ryoji Mochizuki, as well as his relationship with Makoto. In the original game, despite being intrinsically linked to one another story-wise, Makoto and Ryoji don't actually interact all that much, which was a necessary change going into Reload. Even in the movie adaptation, Makoto and Ryoji interact as early as possible, building their relationship throughout the entirety of the third movie, so much so that when it's eventually revealed that Ryoji is the harbinger of the fall, Makoto not only feels angry but also betrayed by someone he honestly considered his best friend at the time. This was more or less what I was expecting Reload would do with their relationship, and just like how Akihiko, Junpei, Koromaru, Ken, and Shinji received their own linked episodes, Ryoji got a set of his own. Honestly speaking, Ryoji's linked episodes feel heavily inspired by Evangelion, more specifically the rebuilds, as well as Kaworu and Shinji's relationship. This is honestly everything I could have hoped for the relationship being built in Reload, as his linked episodes go from the two playing music together in the music room, which is where I believe the Evangelion influence comes from, to the two having a thought-provoking and philosophical conversation about the values of life near the riverside, to all of this eventually building up to Makoto making the choice to live, and Ryoji imparting a music box as a final gift for him to remember him by, as he states that even though he knows that death is inevitable through Nyx, he feels that Makoto is capable of making the impossible possible. This one change not only makes it easier to empathize with Ryoji, but at the same time also makes the final moments of December hit a lot harder when you realize that you and him genuinely built something special together, as opposed to the two barely interacting at all. Earlier on in the video, I mentioned how Atlus captured the essence of Tartarus in all of its glory through Reload. Now, this is the time that I really want to take to explain just how different and just how much more fun Tartarus was in Reload than in the original. In the original game, Tartarus was seen more as a slog than as a challenge that you're meant to overcome. This doesn't mean that the idea of Tartarus being this insurmountable challenge you're meant to overcome wasn't adequately expressed to the audience, but rather, through Tartarus having 264 floors, created a mind-numbing experience to a large variety of people. The innate gameplay loop of Persona 3 didn't help this, as not only could you not control other party members save for your leader character, but in the original Persona 3, it had the fatigue system, where if you climbed Tartarus for too long and you fought in too many battles, characters would get tired, which would affect their performance going forward. I don't know about you, but I absolutely hated this element of Persona 3's gameplay, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people would agree with me. I don't really know a single person that likes the fatigue system in the original Persona 3. But in Reload, not only do they take this out, but they add so much more, which makes this easily the best gameplay in the Persona series, no question. Not only do you no longer have to worry about your characters getting tired, but in this game, just like any other normal JRPG, you can actually control the rest of your party members, which changes the game dramatically like you wouldn't believe. This also means that you pretty much never have to deal with characters doing certain moves that you know damn well will never work on certain enemies otherwise. Reload also integrates some new gameplay elements, such as the shift mechanic, which is really just Reload's version of the baton pass from Persona 5. Even better than that though, Reload's second new mechanic is one of the coolest that I have ever seen within the series, no question. And that of course are the Theurgies, which are special moves that each character in Siege is capable of pulling off. These Theurgies are without question the best animated aspects of just any SMT game in general, not even just Persona. And if you wanted to argue a certain Theurgy being the best in the game, I'd have a hard time arguing against you. So many of these are packed to the brim with symbolism, some of them really show these characters' personalities off really well, and a lot of them are just really cool to look at. They absolutely nailed it with all of these Theurgies, and they are such a welcome addition to each character's kit. To go back to talking about Tartarus for a second, I especially love the inclusion of the Menad doors that can be found while climbing Tartarus, as well as the Menad passages. See, in the original game, Menad really didn't have much reason to exist, or rather, there was no explanation as to why it did, and was only really there to help you grind for the endgame, but in Reload, there's actually a full explanation as to what this really is. In Reload, it's explained that these Menad doors and passages are actually connected to these side paths in Tartarus, leading deeper into the depths unseen by exploring the dungeon normally. By exploring these side paths, we're able to learn some new information and lore about Tartarus that connects all the way back to Mitsuru's grandfather. Integrating Menad into the lore surrounding Tartarus was an expertly done decision, and just as expertly done was the inclusion of the Great Clock. What this Great Clock does is essentially, by utilizing resources by exploring Tartarus, you can actually have some of your characters that have fallen behind your main character in levels play catch up, as they can make up the difference within the blink of an eye. This game pretty much does everything right top to bottom, not just in its faithful recreation of the story, but also the gameplay as well. But I know what some of you might be thinking. Doesn't this nullify the time management element of Persona? And to that I say, not at all. There are several different ways to manage your time in Persona 3 Reload. Whether it be working a part-time job or all the different ways that ATLUS allows you to raise your personality stats in this game, along with managing all 101 of Elizabeth's requests, including her fight towards the end of the game, which I did on the hardest difficulty of the game. Just throwing that out there, you know, the casual fight, I guess, right? I might be him. I can make an entire video on that fight, by the way. Just let me know. I might just do it anyway. I don't care. The fight is really fun. But yeah, top to bottom, I don't really have that many complaints about Reload, outside of obviously a couple nitpicks like I mentioned earlier. But if I were to mention something I truly have a problem with, and this is more so a me thing than anything else, why is Akihiko so goddamn mid in this game? God damn. With all that being said, I think it's finally time to wrap things up by talking about the finale of Persona 3, where the group makes their final climb through Tartarus as the group goes to face Nyx, but not before they have to fight the remaining members of Strega beforehand. With how the game made small but nice little additions to each of the fights, I wonder what they were going to do with Strega. And while they aren't necessarily that different altogether, the differences they do have are extremely major. For one, in Jin's fight towards the end, Jin takes performance-enhancing drugs in the middle of the fight to enhance his damage at the cost of his own life, while Takaya pulls out one of the very first evokers ever made and uses his own Theurgy. I was wondering when this would come into play during the game, since, like I mentioned earlier, when you and Takaya were together against that rogue shadow, it actually drops this Model 1 evoker, which Takaya keeps for himself. So when he finally pulled it out during his final fight and said that he would be sacrificing any and all of his pride to defeat those that stand in front of him, all to then use his own Theurgy, it was a very shocking but very cool moment, even if the fight itself is still very easy. But after defeating these two stragglers, we finally make it to the top of the tower where we greet Ryoji, who's fully become the avatar for Nyx to enact the fall. The fight begins, and it's been preserved in all of its glory as the Nyx avatar flips through the major arcana, including death, as it gives a speech during each phase summing up the meaning of the game. And just like how it was in the original game, this battle embodies so much of what makes Persona 3 Persona 3. Speeches about enjoying life, seeking opportunity, but ultimately the idea that death is what every person in the world faces at the end of the line, and then going forward to reject that very idea in order to live the life you want for yourself. knowing that to live means to live responsibly and not allowing anything or anyone to take away the freedom of choice and ability to make connections away from you. It's just a fantastic set of battles, and I especially appreciate the added dialogue between Makoto and the Nyx avatar. Due to the connection that Makoto and Ryoji forged together during the month of November, what Makoto sees in front of him in the Nyx avatar isn't simply a monstrous being that seeks to bring about the death of the world and the extinction of mankind, but he knows that his friend is in there and still goes to refer to him by that name. It's like a rivalry in a manner of speaking and is a very welcome addition. But as we defeat Nyx and as Makoto takes to the skies to fight the core of Nyx's psyche in the center of the moon, we finally get the moment that every Persona 3 fan has been waiting for: Burn My Dread Reload. Hearing this song come on after waiting the entire game to hear it genuinely did bring tears to my eyes, as corny as that may sound, I know. Seeing Makoto withstand an onslaught of death as he bears the sins and weight of humanity on his shoulders, carrying the power of the universe in his hands and his friends in his heart, is a moment that is, can I say it? It's peak, you know what I mean, right? But with all that being said, we do what needs to be done and end our desperate struggle once and for all. The final scenes of Persona 3 are so heartbreaking and yet so beautiful. Everything that makes this final stretch so amazing has been captured in all of its glory, just like everything that came before it. As you go through the final school days, the friends you've made along the way start to notice you look sick, and all of these social link conclusions hit even harder with all the voice acting, especially the conclusion to Akinari's social link when you get to talk to his mother. But what tugs at the heartstrings even more so emotionally is the fact that you get to talk to Junpei, Akihiko, Ken, and even Koromaru, as all of them start to subconsciously remember the promise that all of C's made to meet again after the battle with Nyx. And as Makoto goes to his room to get some rest, having felt sluggish the entire day, he even gets a text from an unknown sender saying, "Thank you." I can only assume this to be Elizabeth. After having done all of her requests, you give her the understanding of self that she has been looking for, but more specifically, the idea that only she can be the one to find the meaning in her own life and that no one is going to tell her what her meaning in life is. But of course, what hits the absolute hardest is the final day of the game, March 5th, 2010, the day of graduation and the day of parting. On this day, Aigis visits Makoto, and together they go to the top of the school building where they and the rest of C's promise to meet after preventing the fall. There, in a beautifully rendered cutscene, Aigis speaks about the journey she went through during the game, which is not only the culmination of just her character arc, but of Persona 3's themes and lessons as a whole. She speaks on how people eventually lose touch with one another regardless of the strength of their connections, but also the fact that they made that connection at all speaks wonders to the beauty of life. She says that at this point she's grateful to Makoto for helping her to find the purpose in life that she has been seeking. And as we close our eyes and drift off into the unknown, our long journey finished, we know as well as she does that we have no regrets about the life we have lived.
安心して、いつでもそばで私が守るから。
The final question that Persona 3 asks the player is, what is the answer to life? And after playing Reload, I am so grateful to know that this question as well as Persona 3 as a whole, has been skillfully preserved by Atlus for generations to experience now and forevermore. Saying goodbye to you has always been the hardest part of it all. You're a story that deserves to be told, and your characters deserve to be explored by generations, and you are one of the best celebrations of life that will continue to resound throughout the ages. Life is a festival, and to all of you that took a chance and decided to watch this video for whatever reason, I may not be the easiest on the ears, but celebrate life, its grandeur, and everything that comes with it. It's your life, so burn your dread, and thank you for watching.